Simply diversifying repertoire is not going to allow your music program to be culturally responsive. It also doesn't provide more equitable opportunities for your students to engage more meaningfully in your music program. So instead of thinking about how can my repertoire be more diverse and picking music by women composers, Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian composers, the better question is how can we use the repertoire more effectively and intentionally so that we're not engaging in performative diversity. And tonight, that's what we're going to talk about. And so, thank you so much for joining me. Let me know if you're here. I'm live on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube, but I can't see you unless you are on Instagram. So, let me know if you're here. Let me know your questions because I'm hoping that this will be really a conversation. And so today is the first of what I'm hoping will just be a weekly office hours, where I'm going to come on and talk about the issues, but also the topics that as music educators and as arts educators as well, we are interested in learning more about as we are moving our programs and our field closer to really allowing all kids to have a place in our program. So thank you for joining me, whether you're here live or if you are catching the replay. I don't want to assume that you know who I am. So just in case this is your first time joining me in my little corner of the internet, my name is Ashley Cuthbertson. I use the pronouns she and her, and I'm a former pre-K through 12 music educator, professor, and now I am the founder and CEO of A. Cuthbertson Consulting. We're a national educational consulting firm that partners with schools, districts, and organizations to support their visual and performing arts teams with creating policies that allow all students to have equitable access to the wonderful arts offerings that they have in their music and arts programs, helping their teams to create culturally affirming learning environments where students feel not just safe, but brave enough to really engage in the higher order thinking that leads to great learning, and also creating culturally responsive and relevant curriculum where students cannot wait to engage in the learning in the classroom. And so this is the wonderful work that I get the great privilege to do with my clients all over the country and hopefully internationally as well somewhere. And I'm so glad that you're taking a little bit of time out of your day to join me tonight. So tonight's office hours is 3 ways to avoid performative diversity in choosing repertoire for your program. And so as I shared at the top of our time, simply diversifying your repertoire doesn't make your program culturally responsive. It doesn't suddenly make you an equitable music or arts educator. Instead, the better question we need to be asking is how can we choose repertoire more intentionally to support a culturally responsive music program, to support our curriculum, because otherwise we start engaging in this performative diversity, which I'm finding lately in conversations, not a lot of folks really understand. They understand on the surface level what it means to engage in like a performative kind of diversity situation or to not really be doing the work. But then I'm finding that people can't really fully name what that means to engage in performative diversity. And I know for many of the folks in my audience, maybe even you, where a lot of music and arts teachers start on their journey to really centering equitable, culturally responsive practices in their arts programs, a lot of times it starts with the content. So if you're a music teacher, likely you're thinking about how can my repertoire be more diverse? How can I choose music from genres written by composers that maybe are not the standard that we typically engage in? If you are a theater teacher, maybe you're thinking about how can I engage my students in not just theater techniques, but like plays and different things that maybe move outside of the typical way that folks are engaging. Same thing with my visual arts friends as well. And so I know a lot of us start here, but then the trap is that we wind up falling into what is called performative diversity. And this then leads us to think that what we're doing is culturally responsive and is going to create, of culturally affirming spaces, but actually it others our students, and it also others the kind of music, the genres, and the composers and musicians that we're actually seeking to include. So let's first talk about what even is performative diversity. So performative diversity is when we are engaging in, let's say, actions or even strategies where we're pulling in content, ideas, approaches, and perspectives, people that are diverse. And when I say diverse, I know a lot of our minds go straight to racial diversity, but remember, diversity just means differences. So I'm not just saying racial diversity. When I use the word diversity, we're thinking broadly, right? So diversity in ability, diversity in gender, diversity in socioeconomic situation, all the ways diverse. So performative diversity is when we're seeking to, include diverse perspectives, people, ideas, approaches, ways of thinking. And instead of maybe going a little deeper like we should, we just pull from those things and we still do what we were going to do anyway. We still are kind of business as usual. We don't really change the way that we are engaging. We just kind of pull things and use them at a very surface level kind of activities. So let me give you an example. So in the music classroom, a very, very common thing, I guess, of performative diversity that I see all the time are people saying, well, maybe I'm a band teacher and I want to be more diverse in my program. So I'm going to go find some pieces composed by women composers, which is amazing. I love that. We need our programs to be including and highlighting women composers more often. So maybe you program a piece on your band concert written by a female composer. You teach your students the piece, you have the concert, it's amazing, but then that's it. The reason why this is performative is because if you just teach the piece of music without getting into the context of, well, who even is this composer? What led this composer to create this piece of music? What led this composer to, why do we even want to highlight women composers in the first place, right? That's the social political piece. Why is it important that we highlight women composers? If we don't get into these other things, we just picked a piece written by a woman composer, we performed it. It on the surface looks like we are engaging in diversity, but you actually didn't do any of the work. It was performative. Let me give you one more example. Oh yeah, so we pick a piece to teach from a genre that perhaps you don't normally teach outside of the typical traditional pieces. And when I say traditional, here in the US, the dominant typical way of teaching is a very Western European style to music, right? So we're going to pick a piece of music from a genre that's outside of that. Maybe you decide to pick a gospel piece to choose your students, which I love. And so you find the gospel piece and you decide you're going to teach that to your students, and you go ahead and I don't know, maybe you find it in an octavo, or maybe you write out on a staff all of the notes and you teach the students how to read the gospel piece from the staff and you perform it on your concert. Well, a couple of problems. So first, you did the same thing in my last example, which is you taught the gospel piece to your students and performed it on your concert, but then you didn't actually get into, well, what is gospel? What is this genre of music? Why is it important that we learn it? Why is it important, especially now that we learn this piece of music? Where did it come from? That's the first thing, right? Which was the last example. And then the other issue in this particular instance is that gospel music can't really be learned from reading notes on paper notation or looking at a board, right? To really understand gospel as a genre, you have to hear it. You have to feel it. You need to experience it. You need to learn it in a way that is true to the actual genre. I remember as a child, I sang in my church's choir. I don't ever remember a time where, we were holding music. Like I remember we had song sheets, we had hymnals that had the Western European notation, but we weren't really reading the music from that, right? The way we were learning the music was the choir director was playing a passage on the piano, we sang it back. Or maybe they sang a passage to us, we sang it back. We figured out the harmony from there. It was not an exercise in reading from the staff. So if you're teaching your students a gospel piece in that way, you have completely missed the whole point of the genre. It's not a let me read from the staff kind of situation. That's not to say that literacy is not important, but for this particular style, for you to do the same kinds of teaching approaches that you would for those traditional Western European kind of pieces, but you're applying it to another genre, that's again an example of performative diversity, where yes, you brought in a different perspective, a different genre, but you didn't actually change anything about your teaching approach when you actually taught that piece, right? So hopefully that example makes sense. Thank you, Heidi. Let me know if that makes sense. And I see a few more people have joined us over here on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn. I can't see who you are, so let me know in the comments that you're listening. Let me know what's resonating with you. And if you're just popping on, because I see a few more people over here, tonight's office hours is 3 ways to avoid performative diversity when choosing repertoire for your music program. So if you just popped in and missed the first part, make sure you come back later to this exact same link, because I was just sharing, first of all, what is performative diversity? I find, like I mentioned before, many of us are not sure exactly how to define it. So that leads us to engaging in practices that would not be what I think what we're wanting to do. And then I just share a couple of examples. So let me share like 3 specific ways about how you can avoid that, right? So of course we know we want to have diverse repertoire in our programs. Say I have a culturally responsive music program and you're still teaching the standard old dead white guys, right? Or the standard white Western European styles of music, that in itself, it would be not at all what I would suggest to a music or an arts educator as moving towards centering a culturally responsive practice. But again, how do we do it in a way that's not performative, that actually is affirming the cultures, the perspectives, and the diversity that we're seeking to do? Just picking a gospel piece and performing it is not diversity, right? Well, it's performative, but it's not the kind of diversity that we're looking for as music educators who are looking to center culturally responsive teaching. Oh, hey, Isaiah, thank you from tuning in from Jersey. Glad to see you on YouTube. So let's get into three examples of ways that we can avoid it as we still move towards a culturally responsive program, and we're still moving towards a program that will create equitable pathways for our students to have success. So the first way is, first, you need to be very clear on what your pedagogical goals are. Clarify your pedagogical goals for your music program. So whether you are a band director, an orchestra director, you teach elementary general music, we all have or should have a clearly defined curriculum. And if you don't, that's also the work that I do, right? We need to have a clearly defined curriculum with clearly defined pedagogical goals. So it should be very clear to you, or maybe this is the exercise that you engage in, what specifically in my freshman orchestra class are the pedagogical goals for the full artistic process for my students. So what are our performance goals as far as what instances and elements of musicianship are the goals by the time that we finish this year together? What should my students be able to know, understand, be able to do in regards to different performance techniques, in regards to performing together, harmony, part work kinds of things, in regards to be able to respond and understand the elements of music, in regards to being able to connect the music that they're learning to the bigger uses of those pieces of music, where it came from, how it came to be performed that way, as well as what are your pedagogical goals for creating. I find often, especially with ensembles, when it comes to in music, we get very bogged down into like the performance part. And often when I'm talking to teachers I'm working with, they can tell me, what they're working on with their students, the different pieces. But when I ask, what are your actual pedagogical goals for your student at the end of the freshman year of orchestra, then it gets a little bit hazy. It's difficult to choose repertoire that is diverse and is intentionally selected to support a culturally responsive program without being really clear about what are the pedagogical goals that you have by the end of that semester or that year with your students. So that's the number one thing, is you got to be clear on what are the pedagogical goals. And then you can go out and do the things that a lot of us kind of skip this first step of being clear about our pedagogical goals. We skip right ahead to picking the diverse music. But once you have your pedagogical goals clear, then you can go find music that supports those goals. So if you know that you are looking for pieces of repertoire for my freshman band students, or maybe my beginning band students, to be able to engage in extreme dynamic changes. Let's say a single piece of music allows them to go from pianissimo all the way to fortissimo in a variety of different ways. You want them to be very fluent and being able to I'm trying to think of like a flutist, right? Being able to control the air production, the embouchure, to be able to go to those different extremes in the music. Now, how can I find a piece of music composed by a woman that does that? Or how can I find a gospel piece that does that? Hopefully let me know if that makes sense, right? Once we know what our pedagogical goals are, then we go find the pieces composed by a Black musician or a Black composer or a woman or an LGBTQIA plus composer, or from a variety of different places outside of where your home place is. Maybe you're looking for music from, I don't know, from Asia, right? Then we find those pieces of music, but we're specifically looking for how can that piece composed by that indigenous composer support this specific pedagogical goal that I have. We're not just picking a piece by an indigenous composer just willy-nilly. Again, that's the performative piece, right? What's the point of why you're teaching that piece of music? So that's the first thing. Be really clear about your pedagogical goals, and then choose repertoire from diverse places that allows you to be able to meet those goals and to be able to do that. I just want to see if there's anything else I wanted to say. No, that's all. So that's the very first thing. Make sure you're really clear about what your pedagogical goals are, because otherwise, then we start doing, then we start having the conversation that I've had with music teachers many times who push back against why we want to look beyond just the typical band canon, the typical orchestra canon. The pushback off, or one of the pushback comments is often, well, then students aren't going to learn the basic techniques. They're not going to learn the basic elements of music if we don't do these specific pieces. Well, the pieces don't drive the elements, right? The elements are still what they are. And there's so much music. If we just know what we're looking for in these other pieces of music, then sky's the limit, right? So a lot of times that argument kind of ends there, because there's no argument beyond that, right? The pedagogical aspects are what they are. And then you look for them in those different diverse options that you're looking for. So that's the first way. And I see a few more people have joined us. Hey, hey, hey. If you're just coming on, let me know where you're tuning in from, and make sure you come back to the beginning part of this office hours, where we're talking about 3 ways to avoid performative diversity when we're choosing repertoire for your music program. I shared specifically what is performative diversity. And then the other thing we talked about was like why that's a problem. And then I shared that the first way that we can avoid that, along with some examples, is to just be really clear about what our pedagogical goals are, so that then when we're choosing music by diverse composers, we have a specific purpose for what we're doing, right? The second tip I have for you, or strategy, as you're thinking about how do I diversify my repertoire and make sure I'm not engaging in performative diversity, that I'm being intentional, is that we're really clear about what is the context of this piece of music. Okay, Karen, thanks for logging in. So when I think about the contextual piece, in my work, I call it finding the story. So how can I tell the story of this piece of music? The who, what, when, where, why, how of this piece of music, so that there's context to it, right? When we're just teaching a piece of music by an Asian composer, but we don't talk about who the composer is, why they composed that piece of music, for what reason, how is it used, the time and place in which it was used, because the time and place of music also affects it, right? If we are just teaching the piece of music because it's a piece by an Asian composer and we forget the whole context, again, that's performative. So how do we move beyond that? Not only for ourselves as educators and still scholars, but how do we make sure our learners understand the contextual parts of the piece of music as well? Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, I don't have time to go into all the history of the piece of music. One, I think you would find that if you change the way that you are structuring your lessons, your rehearsals, that you have more time than you think. And the second is, I would argue, actually, you don't have time to not do it. So when we think about a culturally responsive and relevant approach to teaching music and the arts, the first thing our learners need from us is to make the music matter to them. The way that we make the music matter is we present the story first, before we get into the weeds of the techniques and the bowings and the fingerings and the trills and all of those other things. The first thing is we have to make sure our learners are engaged. We have to make sure that it matters to them first. We do that through the story. So when you're looking for the pedagogical purpose of the piece of music, and you found a really great piece by a Black composer that is not typically performed, but is so rich in all these different pedagogical connections to your curriculum, then we got to make sure that when we present it to our students, we don't start with all the pedagogical elements. We start with the story, right? We're human beings. We want the connection. Our learners need the connection. We have to make it matter to them first. So we do that through making sure that, just as we need to know it, that they know also who composed this, all the things I just said, right? Who, what, when, where, why, how, and then even going beyond that, because I mean, I could do that in 2 minutes, just run down the who, what, when, where, why, and how, but then go a little bit deeper, right? Not just who is the person, but like, what is their story? Where did they come from? What led them to being a composer? what led them to composing this piece at this time, what was going on in their life, what was going on in society and culture at that time that led to this particular piece. And if they're a living composer, can we find some video footage of them talking about the piece or talking about their life? Can we find um, articles maybe that they have been featured in, or maybe even articles that they have written, right? How are we making it a well-rounded story for our learners to really get them hooked in? When I was working with my own students, when I was in the classroom, that was the piece that my students were most often the most interested in. I always argue I can make anything culturally responsive if I know my learners and I know my content, right? Beyond the surface level. I can look for the connections between my students and their lived experiences, their cultural frames of reference, and that piece of music. So I'm looking for the story. So if we're just going to teach the gospel piece or we're going to teach the Brazilian piece without the story, that's how we get into the performativeness, right? I know now it's November, and many of us are thinking of ways to incorporate indigenous music into our music programs. But then the pitfall I often see, and actually is the impetus for, I wrote about this in my newsletter last weekend, and it was the impetus for me thinking that this would be a good topic for this first office hours. I've seen lots of teachers asking, well, what are some indigenous pieces that I can teach my students this month? Or how can I celebrate, Indigenous Peoples Month? Performative, right? Another day, I'll talk more about my feelings about the months. I'm trying to remember if in the newsletter, I maybe talked about my feelings about the months. The months themselves are not bad, the cultural months, right? The cultural days. It's the way that we approach it in our music and arts programs is often very performative, because then we get all excited about finding music from the indigenous cultures to bring into our classroom in November. And then no other time of the year do we ever revisit that, right? And so now we've othered indigenous music because then we just went back to business as usual. And without intentionally or directly saying it to your students, what unconsciously is being communicated is that this kind of music is only important as like an extra thing that we do for a few weeks in November, and then we get back to the real music, the real work, right? Hopefully that makes sense. And if you're approaching the cultural days, the cultural months in that manner, again, that's an example of performative diversity. So I encourage you to think about how can you apply these strategies that I'm sharing with you tonight to first be clear about pedagogically what are your goals for your curriculum, and then find, okay, it's November, it's Indigenous Peoples Month. You know what your curricular pedagogical goals are. How can you find music to celebrate and embrace and engage your learners in learning about Indigenous cultures, music that actually supports those pedagogical points? And then can you tell the full story of where that music comes from, about the people from which it comes, about the time period, right? You see where I'm going? There has to be much more than just, we played a fun game. That's not it. That's performative, right? We've got to move beyond that, right? That doesn't create a culturally affirming experience for anybody. It makes us feel good that we had a indigenous piece in November, but it didn't actually do anything because you didn't do any work. You didn't do any work to be able to engage students beyond just the surface level, right? So that's my second tip for you, how to avoid that performative diversity piece, is you've got to contextualize the music. I call that you have to find the story. And then my third way is that you have to make it relevant. I kind of touched on this a little bit already, right? So if you know your pedagogical purpose, right, you know your curriculum really well, you know your standards well, you know specifically for this class, these are our pedagogical, like their syllabus, right? These are our pedagogical goals for the year. You find repertoire that is diverse and highlights marginalized people and ways of learning and genres. You find those pieces of music that support those pedagogical goals. You contextualize it by teaching the full story. Then you got to make it relevant for your students. And I just shared a little bit about, you need to make it matter to them first, right? We can't really do anything until students are engaged. And we can't really do anything until they are engaged and they see how it matters to them and their life. A lot of times when I work with my clients, my school district teams, my teachers, often what happens is teachers get kind of lost in the sauce of trying to represent all the different cultures of their students, which is not a thing. Nobody's asking you to do that. And if they were, that would not be a reasonable ask, right? Because to represent all of the different elements of culture is multifaceted. It's not just the color of our skin, right? Or what we look like. There's so much more to it. So try to do that in every single lesson for every single student is not a reasonable ask. But there are human pieces to all of us that we all can connect with. And when you know your learners, You understand the knowledge that they bring into your classroom. You understand the interests that they have. You understand their prior experiences that they've had. We can see themes that we can use to connect the music to them. So I'll give you an example. So I was at a conference in Illinois. That was just last month. I feel like I've lived like multiple lifetimes this year. But just last month, I guess that was in Illinois. And a person asked me about, one of the participants asked me about, well, I'm a white teacher. They were a white teacher. A lot of my students are Black, Hispanic, and it's hard for me to think about ways to connect, different musical genres that are prevalent in their home life, in their community, in their neighborhood. It's hard for me to know how to connect that in my classroom because I just am not familiar with those genres of music. And they were one of the examples that I kind of walked this teacher through was I was like, well, tell me about some things that you know about your students. What are the things that they're interested in? And one of the things that he shared was like, well, my students are really interested in hip hop and rap. And in this area in Illinois, there's a big mariachi culture. And he was like, I just don't know. I'm not really into hip hop or rap. I don't know a lot about mariachi. I want to learn, but like, how do I like make the connections in my class if like I have no idea? And so I gave him the example. I presented him the same thing I present to you. We make it relevant by connecting to the things that make us human, right? The experiences that we all share. And so I said, well, have you ever been to a concert, a concert or a musical performance that got you really excited? And he said, oh yeah. I said, okay, great. Well, tell me about like what it felt like. Tell me about what that experience was like. And he was telling me a little bit about different concerts that he's been to for different like kinds of music that he's really into. And I said, well, your students have probably had that exact same experience. It's just that the genre was different. They've gone to performances, concerts, maybe not necessarily in formal concert halls, maybe in their basement, in their living room, at their church, on the block party, right? They've experienced moments of engaging in musical performances that got them excited, that moved them emotionally. That's where you connect, right? It doesn't really matter the genre because as human beings, as people, we still have things that are common amongst us, even if maybe on the surface it's hard to see. And that's why I always encourage you and other folks that I work with, we have to move beyond the surface of getting entangled in the exact genre, the exact type, the exact musicians. It's so much deeper than that. And that's in fact what culturally responsive teaching is calling for us to do. Is it's not really about the content, it's about how we present it, right? And so I'm curious for anyone that's watching either live or in the replay, what your thoughts are about that. How do we make it relevant by not getting so bogged down? And if you don't know mariachi music, that's not really the point, right? But do you have an experience with something else that would be similar to the prior experiences that your students have with mariachi as just the example, right? And that's really what cultural responsive teaching is asking us, right? How do we understand deeply the cultural frames of reference of our learners? The cultural frames of reference, that's their prior knowledge, experiences, and interests. It's not just about the race piece, right? Although that is one facet, but it's multifaceted. It's like an onion, right? There are all these layers that we have to pull back. And it's not necessarily about the exact genre, the exact thing. So as we're thinking about ways to move away from the kind of performative diversity, because in fact, that's actually what that is, right? If we're trying so hard to just like connect to the students through a genre that they know, but we don't, then we're being performative because we're not being authentically ourselves either. And kids see right through that, right? They can tell when you don't really know what you're talking about or that you're just trying to buddy up to them through a common interest. They see through that, right? And so as we move away from the performative diversity of it all, that winds up often happening, I encourage you to really think about how can we move beyond the surface level, what we see, to really, how can we connect and make it relevant to what our students will need in our classrooms and our music classrooms, but also like, how is it going to matter to them in their actual real life? How is it going to matter in their neighborhood? How is it going to matter to them with their friends, their family? How will it matter to them in 5-10 years when they're adults, right? How are we teaching in such a way that the music actually is teaching life skills and not just skills for the music program, the music classroom? Because in fact, that's where we lose many of our students from music programs, is that they don't see the things that we see, right? Music teachers, we know that music builds skills for life, right? We know that there's all the things, right? The cooperation, the discipline, the communication skills, all the things, right? We know the critical thinking, we know that. But if we don't teach it in such a way that the students know that, then we lose kids because they're like, well, why learn music if I can go do something else that's more fun? Because they don't see the purpose, right? So moving away from the performative diversity of it all means we have to choose music and first think, how can I make this pedagogically sound? How can I make the story matter to my students? And how do I connect it to their relevant and their real life? So let me know what your thoughts are about that. Again, if you're just joining me, thank you for joining me tonight. We're just hopping on to talk about 3 ways to avoid performative diversity when it comes to choosing repertoire for your music program. So if you're just hopping on, I encourage you to go back and watch the replay where at the beginning I talked about what is performative diversity, why that's a problem. I gave some examples of often what I see music teachers doing that I would call performative diversity, as well as 3 specific things that you can do to move away from that. And so I love to hear from those of you that are here, any questions that you have, any wonderings that what I shared sparked for you, because I love for these lives to be a conversation. So it doesn't have to just be my voice in the room. So go ahead and drop in the comments sections wherever you are. I can see you, what your thoughts are, or if you have questions. And so while you're doing that, let me tell you about a couple of things that we've got going on. So if you've been with me for a while, you know that last month I launched my very first book. In fact, here's one of my copies right here, Music as a Vehicle, a practical guide to implementing culturally responsive teaching in today's music classrooms. Super, super excited to finally get it out into the world. I know Isaiah has his copy. Let me know if you're watching, you have your copy also. And so we launched it. Actually, it'll be a month tomorrow. So if you have a copy of the book, if you're one of our book buyers, tomorrow I'm going to release the first edition of the monthly book bites, where exclusive to people who have purchased a copy of the book, I'm going to share a bite-size, get it, monthly bite-size strategy every single month, as well as some resources that will be exclusive to people who have purchased their copy of the book. So make sure if you don't already have your copy of Music as a Vehicle that you grab it. It's available in paperback. We deliver every week, and we have people buying almost every single day. I shipped some books earlier today. So it's available in paperback. It's also available in ebook as well. So I know some people prefer to have an electronic copy of the book. So we have available in 2 formats. All the information about the book and how you can purchase it is on my website. Just head to musicasavehicle.com. It's just the title, the big title of the book, musicasavehicle.com, to grab your copy. And if you do have your copy already, I'd love to hear your thoughts so far, if you've had a chance to dig into it. And if you haven't already taken a selfie and tag me in your selfie picture, make sure you do that. I love seeing everybody's pictures with their Music as a Vehicle books. Oh, and Isaiah shared, really digging into the curriculum part. Oh yeah, let your supervisor know we've got bulk orders. In fact, I think I shared earlier this week that we just ordered the second print run of the books because we had some bulk orders over the past couple of weeks. So we're sold out of our first run of the books, and I anticipate more bulk orders will come. So let me know if you're interested in a bulk order. I would say bulk orders are good if you're going to buy more than if you're gonna buy 5 books, just buy through the website. It's much easier. You can get it the next day. We ship 3 times a week. So if you just order a bunch of books, but if you're buying more than 10, I would say do a bulk order, and all that information is also on the webpage, musicasavehicle.com, or let me know, give me a message and I'll tell you about it. It's not a complicated process on our end, but of course, everybody's school district organization does purchase orders and invoicing differently. So let me know if you are interested in that. And then the other thing I wanted to share is that our newest offering, oh, hey, Tanji, good to see you. Our newest offering, the Music as a Vehicle book talks, are also available now for booking. All the information is also on the website. I'm trying to think of I don't have a cute little URL for that one. It's just on the website. And if you're on my email list, you've likely gotten a link somewhere about the book talks. The book talks are the only way that you can work with me if you're not ready to hop into a full consulting package. They're the only one and dones that I know I said I'm not doing one and done anymore, but the only one and dones that I do are the book talks, because I think the book talks are a great entry point to understanding this work. And they're also a great way for folks who are already kind of on like maybe you have bought the book, you're really excited about it, you want your colleagues to understand better. A book talk is a great way for us as a group to kind of dive into the 4 big themes of the book, as well as I'll walk your team through one of the specific strategies pertinent to your school, your district, or your organization. I just booked one today. So we now only have 3 spots open. I opened 5 spots, and 2 of them already been taken. I'll do one in December. I'll go up to New York City to do one. I'm doing one in January. And so we have February, March, and April. Although February might be, February is still available because I have 2 available in February. One was took today. And so we have one for February, one for March, and one for April available. Let me know if you're interested in a book talk for your team. And then the other thing I wanted to share is that I'm bringing back the monthly webinar series, starting with our upcoming webinar, which will be Wednesday, December 11th at 7 p.m. Eastern. That is the webinar From Theory to Practice, Creating a Culturally Responsive Music Program. And so if you are wondering like, oh, I don't have the book yet, but I want to learn a little bit more about the framework, which is really what Music as a Vehicle is. It's my framework for how do we create culturally responsive music spaces. The webinar is going to be all about that framework and then going a little bit deeper. Yeah, Heidi, make sure you go to musicasavehicle.com. That's where all the information is about the book, as well as the links to purchase a paperback or an ebook copy. And let me know if you have any questions about that. And so the webinar coming up in about 3 weeks on December 11th will be about the framework and going a little bit deeper. And it's also an opportunity for us just to kind of dialogue. So, of course, the book is great, but it's not us being able to talk back and forth. So if you're interested in talking a little bit more about the framework, how it actually happens and what does it look like, and then more importantly, how do we use it as a place to start for creating culturally responsive music and arts programs, I highly recommend that you come on to that webinar. Actually, let me drop the link to that. If you go to my website, it's right there on all the things, but I'll also put the link here on Instagram. If you're on Instagram, if you go to my link in bio, the link for the webinar is there. And then folks that are on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, the links are all over my pages, but let me just pull it up right now and I'll put it in the chat for you. I would love for you to register. There will be time for Q&A, so I'll go through the things. There will be time for Q&A, so if you have any specific questions as we're going through it, or if you've been reading the book and you have questions, of course, if you have your copy of the book, you have my email, so you can email me. I actually do read those emails. But if you're also curious about other things as you're reading, definitely come to December 11th webinar so we can chat about that. And I'm going to be doing webinars every month. So I used to do them every month, and then things got busy, and I kind of put those on the back burner. But I know that my people really enjoy a way for us on a regular basis to be able to engage in this learning, even if it's just in bite-sized pieces. So December's webinar is coming up, and I already have a plan for January's webinar. So definitely make sure that you join us for that one coming up. And then I'll be live again next Wednesday for another office hours. I don't know yet what we're going to talk about. So let me know what you want to talk about next Wednesday, what questions that you have. I'm thinking a little bit, so today was about the repertoire piece. How do we avoid performative diversity? I'm thinking next week we'll talk a little bit about something curriculum and instructional related. So I know Isaiah was sharing about, that's the part of the book he's really digging into. So if you have questions about, well, what does the curricular piece look like, or the instructional piece look like as far as actually a rehearsal plan, a lesson plan in my music program, let me know any specific questions, because that can be what our topic for next week is. I'll probably decide next week's topic by Friday, because I'll send out the weekly newsletters I do every week this weekend. I think I'm going to send out the newsletter this week on Saturday. So let me know if you have a particular topic you want to get into. It doesn't have to be curriculum and instruction, but I was thinking that might be a good place for us to talk about next week. Awesome. All right. I don't see any other questions. Oh yeah, let me know if you're having any trouble getting to it, but the order link for the book is musicasavehicle.com. I dropped the link to the free webinar. It's a free webinar in all the places except for Instagram. Just go to my link in bio, or just go to my website, ashleycuthbertson.com. The links are all over the place there. So yeah, I love chatting with my folks about all these things, and I'm excited to be coming on more regularly now that my life is a little more peaceful after kind of the craziness of getting the book finished writing it in the pre-production, the production, and the marketing. I'm happy to get back into the swing of talking to you more often and being a community. So let me know what questions you have. Let me know what topics you want me to come on and discuss next week. And yeah, I don't see any other questions. And so I think I'm going to end it there for tonight. And I will see you again, same time, same place next Wednesday. If you're on my email list, I'll make sure to send a reminder, just like I did today, about what we're going to talk about. And then I hope to see you also, I hope to see your name rather on the list for December's webinar. All right, have a great evening, everyone. And if you watch the replay, give me a hashtag replay so that you're watching, and I will talk with you again next week. Bye.